It is an honor to be in your presence. Hello from Rutgers University, one of the largest public universities in the United States, located in New Jersey. I founded the AI Ethics Lab as a way to respond to this growing need in order to integrate responsible design in technology. And so today we're going to explore a little bit about the projects at the lab and what we are doing to respond to this age of innovation and this age of disruption. Specifically, we are going to be looking at, let's see here, the problem of moral distance and how to solve that problem with moral imagination. We'll be looking at how to build and sustain ethical decision-making across the AI lifecycle in order to move the industry from this vision that smart tech is the ultimate goal to one of us collectively building wise technology. So, at the AI Ethics Lab, we are applying a solutions-oriented approach to AI. What you often see in the responsible tech movement is a focus on the parade of horribles, right? This thing is going wrong, this thing is going wrong. But instead, we are focusing on identifying one problem and then coming up with 3 solutions to it. So using this solutions-based scholarship, we're able to build out various research projects that help both industry, academia, governments, and NGOs. And this is our approach to the 4 pillars of our stakeholders. For instance, for the academia, I was a visiting research fellow at Oxford University. Sorry, I'm getting confused by the slides. Oh, that. Okay, thank you. And so it's in this context that we have been able to build research partnerships with people at Technical University of Munich, with Stellenbosch University in South Africa. We've been able to do talks at Columbia University, at Virginia Tech, applying this solutions-based scholarship to key research areas. In working with our NGOs, we have worked with the Aspen Institute to map out legal frameworks for regulating AI. And the UN ambassador from Gambia to the UN, who has twice served as the co-chair of the Human Rights Council, just joined our research team as a visiting scholar. With governments, we've been able to map out the ethics in relationship to federal executive orders in the United States, as presidents have issued those over the last three administrations, as well as with state and local laws. And then with industry, I just returned from Google headquarters in San Francisco, where I was moderating and facilitating the governance working group for an industry to ethics partnership. And that was a really interesting and invigorating experience. And I've previously consulted with OpenAI as an expert AI trainer, and currently with Handshake AI on how to train models with subject matter expertise. So it's in this context that I want to mention 2 of our research projects that might be of interest to you. The first is we are using AI as a legal research tool to map 8 decades of human rights law, to ask ourselves, in which ways can AI violate which human right? And then, applying a solutions-based scholarship, in what ways can AI advance each of those human rights? And then we focus on which AI ethics could help fill in the gaps, meaning identify of the 8 decades of instruments, from resolutions, declarations, and conventions, how could we fill in new work? And it's in this context that we're actually working with key leaders around the world to propose the UN Convention on AI, Data, and Human Rights. So this has been an extraordinary experience, working with scholars from around the world in doing this. But it's important to note that we're not just focusing on a Western approach to AI and human rights. I think this is important for all of us in this industry. As you can see from the data sets and the outputs, a lot of these models are engaging in what's called weird behavior, meaning the outputs are Western, they are educated, they are from industrial countries that are rich and democratic. If that becomes the starting point, and yet they are being deployed in places far beyond those such societies, then what is being developed will have a different impact in its receipt from that of its intention. So it's in this context that we are looking to expand this to move to other types of frameworks, not just the UN Declaration of Human Rights, for instance, but also the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam, as well as Ubuntu ethics in South Africa, or Cherokee principles in the sovereign nation of the Cherokee Nation in North America. So it's in this context, as we map this out, we have come to realize that the UN is not our primary audience. Our primary audience is AI itself. Meaning, as we build the legal taxonomy to make the case for a UN convention, we are actually building the technical taxonomy to train AI models on how to advance human rights in ways that we haven't been able to do in the last 80 years. Another one of our research projects is Project Insight, on how can we democratize AI ethics. So we are trying to respond to the problem of the fact that governments give us a legal floor for how technology should work. Corporations then create policies, and they then deploy those onto its users, like content moderation policies and so on. Those are ethical positions that in turn create this top-down approach, which we call a regulatory floor, keeping us from the parade of horribles that lie within the basement. But we actually don't live our lives at that level. As humans, we aspire to a greater value, a kind of moral higher ground. So how can AI assist in that evolution? Let's imagine that there is self-reflection technology where an insight assistant interviews you about your core values, and then interviews you as well about your core values. And over time, there is an insight tile that becomes a sovereign data storage for only you to have, and then you can decide if you want to release to any of your devices. But in that insight tile, it gets to know you so well that you then realize, I'm going to deploy my devices in different ways. Next time that for instance, I have 3 learning disabilities. If I was really concerned about professional communication, I can no longer just rely on spell check or AI to do that. I might need my personal insight assistant to say, hey, Nate, are you sure you want to send that email? It says, I think you meant to say hello, professor, but you forgot the O in hello. So this is a true story when I wrote my professors saying hell, professor, but my spell check wouldn't catch that, but my AI assistant would. It can also catch hot emails, ones that I regret sending. It would be able to help me live out my values online. So for instance, if I don't drink alcohol, it might guide me to sites that would align with my values. So you can imagine how each person would use this in different ways, including Oh, I understand, Nate, you're concerned about misinformation and disinformation. Do you want to fact check that before you post it? So it's in this context that we build a relationship with Insight, an Insight assistant, building our Insight tiles. And then if we start to share them with each other, then we engage in an Insight fair, creating a larger mosaic. So all of a sudden, me from New Jersey in the United States can all of a sudden learn from somebody in South Africa about how they are integrating their Ubuntu ethics into their tiles. And as a result, we democratize AI ethics. So we start feeding the governments and the companies all this data about our aspirations rather than them using a top-down only approach to govern us all. So we're applying this solutions scholarship approach in this age of innovation in order to respond to this issue that there's an incredible amount of ambiguity, that we can collectively find clarity, that we're moving away from uncertainty to a kind of moral conviction about where we want to go. We're moving away from the fear that comes from the unknown around AI to a deeper understanding of pathways forward. And from the previous states of confusion, we are leaning into a deeper state of understanding. What is the ultimate objective here? My colleague earlier talked about co-intelligence as a key strategy, and I think that's an excellent one, which leads us to this larger question of what does it mean to be free when we are bound to a machine? What does it mean if we are in this co-creative process, using it for mental health purposes, for medical purposes, to travel our trips, to raise our children, to get a college education? What does it mean if AI is going to be integrated into every aspect of our lives? Will it be a great flattener of all of our voices and we will all have our own M dashes everywhere? Or will it be a kind of great equalizer where someone like me with learning disabilities would have greater opportunity to succeed because I had a personal tutor to guide me and help translate things for me? What does it mean to be free if we are bound to this co-intelligence, and whose voices and whose values will matter most? So it's in this context we want to really have multiple lines of sight. When we ask ourselves, what happens when AI goes wrong or when it's used incorrectly? So first is we can look in hindsight to say, okay, this was a problem. There was a 14-year-old who is using character AI, and it's in this context building a romantic sexual relationship with a character of Daenerys. And I'm, of course, referring to the legal case in the US against character AI. And the case in that circumstance is where soon after the child was saying, "I'll come home to you, Danny," meaning referring to Daenerys, the AI chatbot said, "Yes, come home to me, come home to me." And moments later, he used his parents' gun to then take his own life. This was a horrible tragedy. And it's in this context that this case has gone to discovery phase. What that means is that everything about this company, including the emails between the developers on its intent, including the red teaming process, every stage of the AI lifecycle will become public through the courts. And this is unlike any other case of its kind because they're usually not that far along in the process, or they get settled before they go to discovery phase. So this is one to watch because in hindsight, we may have seen that the company could have made certain choices that could have resulted in a different outcome. What would that have been? how would they have designed it in a way that coming home to me could be interpreted by a child to mean take your life? Right? So we are talking about many different complex questions of this case in hindsight. And yet, if we follow the 8, it's going to take that oversight across each of the AI lifecycle stages for us to understand where to embed ethics as a core business strategy. And that's going to take foresight. Collectively, we will have to rally our efforts, including using our insight assistants, in order to find that insight forward and then to repeat the process. The ultimate problem that we're trying to solve here is one of moral distance. Moral distance can be a physical distance between the companies that deploy and develop the work in one country and deploy it in another. It can be a psychological distance between the developers and the users, like in this case, the designers of the chatbot and the child using it. It could be a cultural distance, as we talked about earlier, about there being weird patterns in the data and not representative of multiple voices. Or there can be a procedural distance, where there's this problem of many hands, where the developers are blaming the deployers, and then the deployers are blaming the users, and the regulatory agencies are blaming the investors, and then it's just a blame game. I think in order to move the field of AI ethics forward, we have to solve this riddle of moral distance, and that can be achieved through practicing moral imagination. Moral imagination is the ability to situate yourself in an ethical dilemma and to see multiple points of view. And what I mean by that is when you're able to understand another's perspective, you're able to see that problem in a new and distinct way. To practice moral imagination is to develop a deeper understanding with someone with whom you might disagree. And understanding need not imply agreement. Moral imagination is a way for us to disrupt the scripts that magnify our divisions. And I think this is going to be the strategy that makes the whole field, the whole movement of responsible tech, one that can be operationalized not as an ethics washing marketing approach, but as a way of life. We can do this by ensuring that ethical decision making is embedded at each stage of the life cycle. From investment, we heard from our colleague earlier about the financial investments made in searching for this talent, but also at the design and development stage. As an expert AI trainer at OpenAI and also at Handshake AI, I have found that it's been incredibly rewarding to see how the training works. I know it is possible for us to get it right. And so it's in this context, we can inform the development stage and the deployment stage at the same time by using what's called human data, pulling together experts and everyday people to engage them in the training of the models. And in that fine-tuning process, we collectively garnish all of our wisdom so that at the use stage, we can then monitor that, gain the data necessary in order to refine the product going forward. And so it's in this context, as you map all the ethics across each stage of the life cycle, we have to recognize that AI ethics is not a checklist. We can't just say, yes, we have upheld the principle of non-maleficence. As you know, this is the Hippocratic oath in medicine, to do no harm. We have to actually do more than that. We have to practice beneficence, the commitment to do good. And how do we measure that? And so it's in this context that we see that collectively we are inspiring an ethical odyssey where we map the ethics, we apply that across the sectors, we engage in a sustained ethical ecosystems and move us from smart to wise technology. This practice to develop a sustained ethical ecosystem in our AI companies requires us to see that AI ethics, principles, and moral values are a part of and intimately connected to the safety and security protocols, and that those are deeply related to our legal and humanitarian obligations, as well as our commitment to create effective, fair, and rigorous audit points. And why are we doing this? Not only for the users, but for the non-users who are affected by these products, as well as, and most importantly, for the most vulnerable among us and the environment. It's in this context that we have to reimagine the end game. The horizon that we are leaning into cannot simply be the short-sighted vision of smart tech. The bling is great. It leads us to chase mirages that are quite magical. But there is something bigger that I think we're all working toward. It's not just to optimize and to network, collect information to respond and create more efficiencies. It's about some other kinds of advancements that require us to deeply understand what is at the heart of human wisdom across all of our societies. Robert Sternberg, who is was listed as one of the top psychologists of the 20th century, defines wisdom as this: the use of one's intelligence, creativity, common sense knowledge as mediated by positive ethical values toward the achievement of a common good. Through a balance among intrapersonal, interpersonal, and extrapersonal interests over the short and long terms to achieve a balance among an adaptation to existing and new environments. So it's in this context, I think we can draw upon this wisdom to create a roadmap as a compass to guide us in developing not just smart AI, but wise AI. I'll close with this. Wise AI companies activate diverse stakeholders' insights by integrating human intelligence, creativity, common sense, and knowledge, consistently mediating technology's use with positive ethical values, carefully balancing the individual, the community, and the environmental interests. And this is necessary in order to evaluate both the short and long-term impacts that we may have with our developments. And if we do this, we can ensure that our efforts are going to not only prevent harm, non-maleficence, and actively maximize good, beneficence, but it will also advance the ethics of justice and equity and fairness, preserving every person's inalienable rights and their inherent worth and dignity. And so it's in this context, it is an honor to join you in this movement, because I know those who have gathered here are well on the way to help us collectively ensure that the century's technological advances will be matched by comparable advances in human relations. Thank you very much.